G'day, Doc.
What's up?
How are you?
I'm doing great. I was partially expecting you to come on in full costume of
Of a lion.
something else. Not that I'm disappointed, but
No,
it
it
is
is
Halloween.
Halloween. It is Halloween, but you have to consider that I dress up every day of the year.
True.
So
This is
Halloween
true.
is just not special for me. But I love your setup here. You're clearly an intellectual who's not a vegan
Oh, how did you know?
because there's a skull,
What gave that
over the
away?
top of your head.
Oh my God, you saw that here. There you go. This is true. This is very offensive to people.
Wow. How dare you?
Cool, right? Yeah.
How dare you? Where are you in the world?
So I'm right outside of New York City. My husband is just finishing his last year in medical school. So he was in the military for a decade and now in a second career finishing med school. So we're right outside New York City.
Incredible. Okay, well, let me introduce you and we'll get right into it. Here we go.
Okay.
Dr. Gabrielle Lyon received her doctorate of osteopathic medicine and is board certified in family medicine. She has her undergraduate degree in human nutrition from studying vitamin and mineral metabolism, chronic disease prevention and management, and the physiological effects of diet composition. She also completed a research/clinical fellowship in nutritional science and geriatrics at Washington University in St. Louis. Dr. Gabby motivates people at any age to reach their fullest potential with the principles of muscle-centric medicine. Is that a good intro? You like that?
Yeah. It's pretty good.
Okay, good.
Like it.
So
Thank
you know what?
Appreciate it.
Here's the thing about longevity and the discussion around longevity that I always hear. People are always talking about how to live longer, but they're not talking about how to live better. They're just like, oh, how to live a long time and probably look like a mole rat by the end of your life. And
Totally.
I think even there's a a longevity expert that we both know who loves the mole rat because they live for a long period of time. But I don't want to be a mole rat. I want to live for a long time and thrive doing it. How necessary is muscle for that process?
It's essential. It's the only way. And you bring up a really good point. When we think about longevity experts, there's probably 5 big longevity experts in this space.
Mhm.
And they get a lot of publicity and there's a lot of discussion and things like restricting dietary protein. And, it's not that muscle doesn't matter, but really there's only 2 ways to stimulate muscle, and that's dietary protein and training. So if you're eliminating one half of that equation, you're really going to struggle. But going back to this longevity concept, there's maybe five main experts that kind of flood the market. But if you ask a trained geriatrician or anybody else, hundreds of other clinicians and thousands of other scientists within the space, nobody is arguing that, right? And I think perspective and narrative is really essential to highlight, especially as these choices that we make midlife have the potential to be a life or death decision. And I mean, I know that may be extreme, but ultimately what you do and how you build muscle determines how you age.
It's more of a death is inevitable. So it's more of a life or like a bad life or a good life situation. Like it's like, do you want to thrive or do you want to be fragile?
Yeah. I love that you actually bring that up. I think that one of the pushes to focus so much on longevity is actually the fear of death.
Yes.
And I think from an intellectual perspective, everybody is trying to do all these little things as opposed to focusing on some of the core fundamental things like build muscle, eat dietary protein, be strong, be resilient against the environment or the perception of stress. These kinds of things rather than take your resveratrol or restrict protein in the middle, like whatever it is. I do believe actually perhaps it is a fundamental fear of death.
Yeah, you mentioned before at around middle age how vital it is to be starting to build muscle or to be building muscle at that age. What do you consider mid-age, middle life?
Great question. This is a great question. We know that as hormones change, typically around your 30s, that the tissue has the potential to change. I say this in absolutes, but perhaps it's not absolutes. Perhaps that we are up against a very sedentary lifestyle. So as I speak in absolutes, saying, okay, at 30, your testosterone is lower. You maybe are not driven by insulin as much as it relates to growth, and perhaps insulin is going to make your waistline grow wider versus grow taller. And I think that while we discuss midlife, it's around 30. But could that be 35? Could it be 40 where these hormones kind of drop off? There's definitely a range.
Yeah. So essentially, at a time when our hormones are starting to change, essentially drop off, like when testosterone at a certain age, for a man like myself, I'm 35, testosterone starts to go down. And we know that like around, in menopause and like later on in life, that muscle really starts to deplete. Hormones really start to taper off. And I think you've mentioned before that for women in particular, it can be a really dangerous thing if they don't have enough muscle. I heard you say yesterday that like for women of a certain age, if they fall and break their hip, they have a 50% chance of walking again. Can you clarify that?
The 65 and older, one of the leading causes of death is a fall. And I mean, think about it. Here, a 65 and up, one of the number one leading causes of death is directly related to muscle mass. And listen, someone could say, well, you could fall because you have a stroke. You could fall for numerous reasons. But ultimately, from clinical experience, typically it is issues with leg weakness, issues with proprioception, issues with low muscle mass, issues with instability and balance, and things that could have been trained up. Of course, that's not going to protect all falls, but if an individual falls and breaks their hip, their trajectory of life, for the most part, is very poor. Yeah.
So we're saying that like muscle is kind of like to prevent people from falling, you need muscle in order to balance, but you also need muscle as a kind of like an armor, I suppose. Like if you fall, there's something there to protect you.
Yeah. I like to think about muscle. Oftentimes we think about muscle in this fitness capacity when we're young. We think about it as it relates to athletes and performance, and that's all valuable. My perspective on muscle doesn't really relate to that. It really is from a medical perspective, muscle as medicine, thinking about its metabolic properties, its role in protecting an individual and preventing disease. You mentioned muscle as body armor. Absolutely, in more ways than one. So there's the physical body armor if you fall, and one could arguably say fat also plays a role in that. But the other part about it is the amino acid reservoir in the body. So what does that mean? That means that if you fall and break a hip and you're in the hospital, your body is going to need to consume something, right? And your body typically will leverage the skeletal muscle mass you have first. It does require those amino acids for protein turnover and rebuilding and repairing all tissues in the body. So muscle, we know that the more muscle mass, the more healthy muscle you have, the better your survivability against nearly all diseases.
Yeah. What does it do for your immune system?
Yeah, it's cool. Muscle is above and beyond this tissue that we think about for exercise. So skeletal muscle is muscle that we have under voluntary control, which is amazing. We actually can think about an organ and move it. And I can't think of another organ. Is there another organ that we can do that with? I guess the heart, but not really. So perhaps the diaphragm, but the direct voluntary control is unusual and makes the skeletal muscle under our direct control, meaning when you contract it, you have the potential to interface with the immune system. And this is data out of Pedersen's lab, and she is, I think, in Copenhagen now. She was the leader, right? Really the person that brought this to light, that exercising muscle releases myokines. Myokines are these proteins that spread throughout the body, and the literature would suggest that there's perhaps 100-fold increase in these myokines, in particular one called interleukin-6. Now, people have heard of interleukin-6 as it relates to a cytokine storm, right? These inflammatory markers that go up, and then, oh my gosh, you're a disaster zone. But what's so interesting is these cytokines are released from cells of the immune system on one hand, right, that can actually create an inflammatory state in the body. They're also released in skeletal muscle. And when they are released from skeletal muscle, they have a counter-regulatory effect in the body. So it can modulate or dampen or temperate, make the immune response a bit more temperate. And this is very interesting in the way that you can leverage skeletal muscle to lower immunity and even autoimmunity. And autoimmunity is when the body begins to attack itself. But for autoimmune rheumatic disease, there's room for skeletal muscle and exercise as a treatment.
Right. So well, inflammation is the cause of most disease, maybe all disease. I wouldn't know, right?
I mean, low-grade inflammation definitely contributes.
Yes, and so what you're telling me is that
definitely
exercise
makes everything worse at some point. Yeah.
Right, and so what you're telling me is exercise and muscle helps to dampen the effects of that inflammation.
Yes, it's pretty cool.
That's quite cool. What about?
What else is? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no. I know. I want to know what else you think is really cool.
What I think is really cool is that the body is designed for exercise. So a sedentary state is essentially an unhealthy state. The idea that we leverage exercise, we're actually genetically designed for it, is a way in which the body creates a homeostatic regulation, bringing itself back into balance. And it's optional, which is crazy.
Right. So we are designed to move, basically.
Yeah. And yes, we were designed to move. And I believe from a genetic standpoint, we were designed to move as it relates to longevity and protection of the being. So, there's all these states and discussions about, healthy sedentary individuals. Like if you look in the literature, like that's, it's this funny new thing, the healthy sedentary individual. There's absolutely no such thing.
Right. It is funny because you don't think about that. Well, we always talk about what our ancestors were doing when they were chasing down deer. And we always think about, the way that they were exercising in order to do that. And then we think about them eating that deer and how necessary that was for them. They were eating meat, they were eating protein, they were eating organs. But we don't often talk about how important it was for their bodies to be doing that movement in the first place.
Yeah. Can you imagine if we actually had to go pick almonds and crack those nuts?
Yeah.
I mean, have you ever seen our chestnut? That's not going to happen.
Yes. We might get good at climbing trees.
Yeah, that is true. So,
we'd be
these are just some of the...
We'd be going back to the monkeys.
Yeah, it's just so interesting to think about where our food comes from, and this idea and discussion that people talk about you should eliminate or limit an entire food group makes no sense whatsoever. It's crazy. I've been in this space for a long time, and these discussions that we're having now were never like that. These were not issues.
Yeah, it's kind of like the loudest voices from either side of the extremes have gotten louder and louder.
Always.
The extreme carnivores and the extreme vegans. It's really insane. If ever there is a riotous comment section around diet, it's undoubtedly begun by an angry vegan. It's just always the way. They're incredibly ideological. They're really dedicated to what they believe in.
Yeah. The history of nutrition has always been that way. Back in, the original vegan group, I think there's this guy named Sylvester Graham, and they were called Grahamites. And they believed that this guy, he actually ended up dying at 57, but he was very vocal in the space. And one of the things was that you shouldn't eat meat because it would increase your sexual desire. You should eat graham crackers. That's actually where graham crackers came from in a push against masturbation.
Right.
And it was using food as a way to be morally sound. And that is so unusual when you think about it. It's really the only science that uses, it's like weird. Nutritional science and morality are often combined. It's very unusual.
I know who I'd rather have a beer with. And it isn't Graham. And it isn't Kellogg. They're all, Kellogg was involved in that too, wasn't he?
Yes. Yeah. This was the idea that people should be more vegetarian, eat more grains, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, for everyone listening out there, this is actual history that you can go and look up if you want. The Grahamites and Kellogg designed diets because they believed that the libido was, and the male libido in particular, was the biggest problem with society. That these rich foods were essentially causing sexual sin, and so they designed an entire food. I guess they kind of designed the food pyramid in a way. That bottom section of the pyramid is always full of carbohydrates if you look at a food pyramid, and that's their doing. So this isn't conspiracy. You can go and look this up. It's actually insane. But they were trying to design you to be less sexual.
I really love that you know about this and have heard about this. And then fast forward to World War II, or maybe, I don't know exactly when Sylvester Graham was alive, but in World War II, when everyone was going through rationing, there was this push for home victory gardens where individuals were encouraged to eat less animal products and send all nutrient-dense food to the millions of soldiers overseas. What's so fascinating is basically at home base, the rationing was, we're going to send a pound of meat. Each soldier gets rationed a pound of meat. If they're injured, they'll get 250 grams of protein. And then on the home front, you are going to grow victory gardens and you're going to eat fruits and vegetables and grains and things of that nature. What's so fascinating is it's almost as if we see a resurgence of that with a different narrative. So it's same premise, which is meat is good for other people, but not for me. Reduce these animal-based products because you're supporting the troops. So it's a different kind of morality. So now we're supporting troops, but we see this happen in cycles. So there's now a resurgence of the same conversation, which is so fascinating. And it's as if history is repeating itself.
It's kind of like the individuals who are at home are sending the nutrient-dense foods to the troops. So it's kind of like the sedentary individuals should be eating their plant-based, and the athletic individuals should be eating their nutrient-dense foods.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. But I suppose that could be. It's this anti-animal narrative goes deep, and it's every 40, 50 years, there's a new narrative about, okay, it's bad for the environment, which we know that's a smokescreen. This environmental conversation is a complete smokescreen for big industry and fossil fuel. You can't eat your way out of climate change. You just can't. Yeah. So it's interesting.
From an ethical standpoint, vegans will often claim, well, nobody died for my salad. No animal died. It's like, actually, more animals died for your salad than died for my steak. One animal died for my steak. If you're eating a salad with asparagus, avocado, lettuce, there may be about 40 different animals that have died for that crop. So I call bullshit.
I think ultimately, what is going to happen is we all have to agree that we have a globe to feed, right? There is a massive population that we have to feed. And at some, in some regard, the fact that an individual would get access to high quality food is a luxury and a gift. And it shouldn't, in other countries, it's sacred. It's important. It's nutritious. So.
Absolutely. So let's pivot to protein, because we're talking about it and how much protein we should be eating as individuals every day. I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Well, we can start off with the RDA. So the recommended dietary allowance here in the U.S. is 0.8 grams per kilogram, which is very low. And that is the bare minimum to prevent deficiencies in 97.5% of the population. That's too low. They haven't changed the recommendation since the 70s, so that's weird.
Wow.
They should be changed, and eventually that will happen. The data would suggest that double that really for more optimization. Again, these recommendations are done and based off of nitrogen balance studies, which are 18-year-old men. So 18-year-old kids 1 gram per pound ideal body weight, I think, is much more valuable for an individual for optimization. That maybe on the higher end, individuals can titrate down or even up if they want, depending on their goals. I think we have to think, what is the end goal in mind? And if they have issues with body weight, are they overweight? Do they want to build muscle? Any of those things. But 1 gram per pound ideal body weight is a great place to start for everybody.
Wow, that's great advice. So I think about me, I'm 220 pounds, 220 grams of protein a day. Can I tell you, I've really been focusing on my protein in a crazy way over the last 6 months, let's just say. And I find it to be actually, you've got to be conscious of it. You've got to be actively thinking about the amount of, eating protein and eating enough protein. So let's talk about ways in which we can get enough of that protein in. It has to be through nutrient-dense foods.
And by the way, you could go a little bit lower. So how tall are you, Luke?
I'm 6'5".
Oh my God, so tall.
Yeah.
That's very tall. You could probably go lower in protein. You probably don't need 220 grams, but it's a great place to start. So for example, if you wanted to reduce it to 200 grams, you would be just fine. The question is, where else would you get your calories from? Again, you don't struggle with body composition issues. It doesn't seem like you have any of those issues, but for the listener, they can go above that and below it. We haven't really seen any detrimental effects on the higher ends. So in terms of what are practical ways individuals can get protein, I think that whole food sources are fantastic. And that is, beef, bison, chicken, fish, eggs, dairy. Dairy is good. It can be higher in fat, but, Greek yogurt. I know there's a lot of people that don't like dairy, but we actually eat a lot of dairy here. So there's that. And then if someone is going to do a shake, I think whey protein shakes are great. Yeah. Very valuable. There's immunoglobulins in them. Whether they get it and have any systemic effect, I don't know. But as a food matrix, whey protein can be great. And then the other thing
I want to know about that whey protein. Don't you dare skip over.
So
what do you mean the systemic effect?
Lactoferrin and alpha-lactalbumin. And it has these bioactive compounds that can be good for the immune system, could be good for gut health. But again, remains to be seen. But those are some potential benefits.
Well, it would kind of depend on the quality of the whey, wouldn't it? Because there is whey itself. Like if you were to take whey from a cheesemaker, whereas where whey comes from, there would probably be probiotics in that whey, which is like fresh whey. But then the whey that you're getting down at, your vitamin store may not have all those enzymes, right?
True. It's true, right? So it would probably be product specific. And if it's, depending on how it's processed, depending on probably the processing.
And then why do you recommend a whey protein over like a soy protein or a pea protein?
Yeah. I know that you know this answer, but the listener may want to know this answer. And it's, we don't see those isolated proteins exist in nature. And I do have concerns, I'm a clinician and I do have concerns of what that looks like over a decade to 2 decades of use of these plant-based proteins that, we know that, for example, pea protein has estrogen-like activity. It doesn't have estrogen, but it has estrogen-like activity. And in these high concentrations, again, it doesn't exist in nature. So I'm not saying that it's bad because, we don't really know. It hasn't been around that long. But it always concerns me when we're now introducing foods that don't in a fashion that don't exist in nature. I don't think anything ever good comes from that. Yeah. It's like a frankenfood. I think that we have to be cautious.
Yeah, and I think for everyone listening, I think what Gabby's talking about is if you take some pea protein powder and you were to get and eat the amount of actual peas that it would take to get that amount of protein, that would be an unnatural amount of peas to eat. AKA, you were not supposed to get your protein from peas. Nature never designed it that way. You were designed probably to get your protein from dairy, meat, etc. So to eat, it takes a lot. Let me just say this: it takes a lot of quinoa, it takes a lot of peas to be able to get your daily recommended amount of protein. It's really hard to do that.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that we're now taking this. We're isolating the protein from peas and taking it out of actually the whole food, and that's weird.
And it's a whole process, right?
It's a bad idea. It's processed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And listen, is it okay to eat processed foods? I think that probably we could argue that lots of things are, quote, processed.
Yep.
But when we are eating foods that are new to the human in the way that it is, it's makes me uncomfortable as a physician who's dedicated their life to making sure that people are healthy, and it's my responsibility. It's uncomfortable for sure. And we don't know the long-term effects, and the other thing that I worry about is as we spread the message, as the message is spread about how individuals should reduce animal-based products, I do worry about the generation that is susceptible to that information, the millennial generation that really is susceptible during their peak growing years. I definitely have concerns about that.
Right. So like for me as a millennial, it's right now. It's like, it's really important, like between 30 and 50, let's just say, to be actively concentrating on your protein intake and your muscle. Right. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah. And, the concept that it's not going to get easier, right? It's how do we plan for the inevitable illness or injury? Because it's going to happen. It's an unfortunate truth, and it's a bit depressing, and perhaps there's maybe a bit negative, but the truth is it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And how you plan for that, it's not if, it's when. And that's the reality of it. So you gotta plan for that period of decline.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly wouldn't be a good idea for anybody. My mum is a nurse, or was a nurse at a nursing home for most of my life.
Oh.
And so, putting people at that age on a low protein diet would be a bad idea. Putting my toddler at 2 on a low protein diet would be a bad idea. So like I always think of it this way. I look at the way that my toddler eats and I'm like, well, why wouldn't I feed myself like that? If we know that it's so necessary for toddlers to get enough protein, enough fat, why would we think as adults that we don't need to do that? It
makes no sense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the argument would be like, we're not growing, but the reality is we do go through tissue turnover. The body replaces easily 250 grams of protein a day, right? It's constantly going through protein turnover, and you also have to maintain healthy muscle. And that's critical. It's critical. Yeah. And just healthy tissue in general. Key.
There's something that I think about you often, which is a strange thing to say to a fellow human being who you're not married to. But I think about you often when I drink my protein shake, because I used to have a shake and blend a shake with milk and berries and things like that and protein. But now I don't do that. I just have water and protein. And I took that from you. Why do I do that? I actually don't even know why I do it. I just listen to you.
So I like that. I would say that the first meal of the day is most valuable. So if you're doing that for the first meal of the day, I tend to keep the carbohydrates lower for that first meal of the day. The first meal where you're coming out of an overnight fast is the muscle is primed for metabolic activity in terms of muscle protein synthesis. So first meal of the day, dietary protein is ideal. And I suppose a shake is easier to get, and hopefully you're drinking it at one time as opposed to sipping it throughout the day so that you get that boost in amino acids. The other thing is that you do have to earn your carbohydrates. There is this thought that, carbohydrates can be thought of in a 24-hour period. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think about discrete meals for all foods. And that includes protein and carbohydrates. And I think a good thing for the listener is perhaps if it's not around exercise recovery, 50 grams of carbohydrates or less per meal is a great strategy. Notice I said 50 grams or less. So there's plenty of room if an individual likes to eat carbs. But again, it really is about how much activity, what is their metabolic flexibility, and can they manage?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's not for carbohydrates, particularly for people who are very active, are fantastic. And what I usually do for anybody out there listening is I usually place my carbohydrates around my activity. So after a good big workout, I'll usually have some fruit or a bowl of white rice with my beef. And I think that's a good way of thinking about it. It's like replacing glycogen in the muscles might be necessary to have some carbohydrates.
Yeah, I am definitely not anti-carbohydrate. I'm anti-carbicide, which would be obviously a ton of carbohydrates, depending on what someone's calorie load is.
And I think it is an important distinction, because when we talk about carbohydrates, we can be talking about fruit, great sourdough, white rice, and that's what we think is great. Carbohydrates are awesome and a great fuel for the body. But when we demonize carbs, which we do it from time to time, we're really demonizing the trash, junk, highly processed carbohydrate, the sugary cereal, Frosted Flakes, Honey Nut Cheerios.
I found those in my cabinet.
What?
Frosted Flakes. I found Frosted Flakes in my cabinet.
Who put them there? You?
My husband. Can you believe that? I come home, gone for a weekend in Sacramento. I come home, there's Frosted Flakes in my cabinet. Can you believe it?
It's a childhood thing, surely, for him.
I literally made him throw it. I could not believe it. Not that it's like, he's like, I'm running a marathon. I'm running the New York Marathon. I'm like, honey, why are there Frosted Flakes and Cheerios in the house? The kids cannot do this. Like,
yes.
What is on? But anyway, yeah.
I feel the same about seeing, like, when I see, like, canola oil in my friends, like those clear plastic, like, jugs of oil. When I see that in my friend's thing, I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm going to throw that out for you.
You're going to upgrade to avocado oil.
Yeah. Get some olive oil in there. Let's talk about lifting and how often a person should be lifting. So daily recommended intake, according to you, a good general rule of thumb is to think about how many pounds of body weight you have and then match that in grams of protein. Let's talk about lifting, because we've got to put that protein to good use.
Yeah, for sure. And I've thought a lot about this, especially even more recently. There's this concept of, what are you training for? Are you training for strength, hypertrophy? Is there some of this strength hypertrophy continuum? Great paper by Brad Schoenfeld that recently come out. I think it depends on a lot of different things. I will say, as a broad general recommendation, 3 to 4 days a week, I think is great. I think that, again, it depends on what your goals are. If you are looking for strength versus hypertrophy, I think that there's probably an importance for both. Again, when I think about hypertrophy, I think about creating more space for glycogen storage. I don't, my mentor, Dr. Donna Lehman, thinks that that's a terrible idea. So this is the first thing that we really disagreed on. And then, of course, understanding strength as it relates to prevention of sarcopenia. Because really, it's not about the amount of mass per se, although it is. It is. So I think that when we think about training, here's how I think about it. I think about endurance type training for mitochondrial function, and obviously utilization of substrates, meaning carbohydrates and fatty acids. And then I think about I think about anaerobic training, which is somewhat of a combo between high intensity interval and sprint interval training. And then I think about hypertrophy strength training. And I know that they're not the same thing, but I really think about it really in terms of hypertrophy. So it's those three domains when I think about training. When I think about hypertrophy, I think 3 to 4 days a week. Again, what is hypertrophy? It's really focusing on getting the muscles bigger. But again, as you contract skeletal muscle, you create flux. And when I mean flux of, say, the fatty acids in the muscle, flux of the glycogen in the muscle, flux of the storage nutrients in the muscle. Mm-hmm. And that's actually critical. So actually to flux that out and to have flux so that you don't get a static environment within that tissue is really important. So 3 to 4 days a week. Yeah. Build up of those nutrients that aren't being put to use. You're essentially using all of those nutrients, all those amino acids and glycogen, right? And fatty acids. And you should create that flux. That's really important. And that's why sedentary muscle can become so unhealthy. And that's why I believe that these diseases of aging really begin decades earlier. You can see it in 18-year-old individuals who are non-sedentary. You do see insulin resistance, which is simply the body's inability to be sensitive to insulin, which is a hormone that comes out of the pancreas to move glucose into the blood, or glucose into the cells. So resistance training or strength training, hypertrophy work 3 to 4 days a week. And then I do think endurance training is important. A lot of people kind of would argue against that. But again, I'm not coming from a perspective of performance, I'm really thinking about aging and longevity. And I believe that there should be, and I say this, like I cringe when I say this, should there be 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous aerobic activity a week? I mean, that's the recommendation. I think that if you're lifting appropriately, you might not need to do that. But, I would recommend, depending on where someone is, again, 3 days a week. And then, this seems a little bit robust, one session of some kind of hitting that peak heart rate. And that would be, and people can build up to it because it's very uncomfortable, and that would be sprint interval training, but people can build up to and get used to doing that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so 3 to 4 days a week of lifting and lifting heavy things, and then 150 minutes, let's just say, of, which sounds like a lot, but in a week it's not that much. Of
it's 30 minutes, 5 days a week.
30 minutes, 5 days a week of moderate, it's like, what about a fast walk?
Yeah, you could do that. You could do that. And listen, I don't do 150 minutes, so I am saying something that I know is the recommendation, but I don't actually do it. So I don't do that. I lift heavy 3 days a week. I do some kind of dynamic movement. I do some kind of, I'm working towards the sprint interval training. I don't have a great engine right now. So I'm doing more high intensity interval training. And then some form of cardiovascular activity.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I highly recommend walking and walking at a pace. If you can put a weighted vest on or something like that, do that. If you don't have that, don't worry about it. Go for a walk at a pace that's fast. If somebody's with you and you're struggling to talk, you're doing really well. If you're struggling to breathe just only out of your nose and you really want to breathe out of your mouth, that's great. That's like a good sign that you're in a good zone, the zone 2, which is fantastic for the brain, not only the body. Yeah, I've just got this thing called a Carol bike. I don't know if you know about this, but it's a 5-minute workout. Yeah, so I do 2 20-second sprints within that time.
That's amazing. Yeah.
It's fantastic. I mean, the great thing about a bike doing those type of sprints is that it's somewhat of a controlled environment. It's very hard to injure yourself doing a 20-second sprint on a bike. Whereas a run, if your body's maybe not quite up to that, a 20-second sprint run is like a lot for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I've injured myself doing that. But the Carol bike is great. It's been used for a very long time. And you can gauge metrics. You can see how far you're pushing and then how you improve, which is when you think about training and you think about improvement, it's really good. Also, it sets a standard for where you should be.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so we've talked about how important muscle is for longevity. We've talked about eating enough protein. We've talked about lifting weights. Is there anything else you want to mention?
I think something good to discuss is a lot of the myths around dietary protein is we have to really understand that we hear a handful of myths that are somewhat annoying. For example, protein, if you really take a step back, protein, like animal-based protein, would be the demise of all humankind. So you'll hear it's going to give you cancer, it's going to destroy the environment, it's going to destroy your bones, possibly your kidneys, and it's going to kill you earlier. So basically, eating this food that we have been eating since the beginning of time is going to lead to our demise. We've been doing pretty well so far. So if I can briefly, there is no high quality evidence that protein causes cancer. It just doesn't exist. There is also no high quality evidence that protein causes kidney disease. In fact, there's multiple meta-analyses that have come out, which is a group of studies, high quality studies that look at data over a period of time that would say that that's not true. Also, protein is necessary for bone, like dietary protein, you need it for bone. So I think that, and then obviously the environmental smokescreen issue. So those are the handful of arguments that individuals would hear that I would say there's absolutely no truth behind other than a lot of media push.
Yeah. I want to ask you, actually, you look fantastic. I see your Instagram. I saw you lifting the other day. What are you doing? What's your vibe? I think it's a great question to ask. Is like, we're always talking about, well, in general, this is good to do. I don't know about your specific circumstance. Well, we know about your specific circumstance, and you're killing it. So
yeah, I got two little kids, and
you've got two kids and a husband, like right? So you're a busy person, and you're a doctor.
So I have a 2-year-old. He's not quite 2, so he's like 19 months.
Oh,
I don't know if you knew that.
I've got a 2-year-old. I didn't know that.
Months.
Okay, beautiful.
And I have a 3-year-old.
Oh, wow.
So I have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. And and my husband is in full-time medical school. And I run a full-time concierge medical practice, just finished a book, traveling and speaking all the time, doing a lot. Like there's a lot going on. I will say I'm very disciplined. So I don't miss stuff. I don't make excuses for myself. Mm-hmm. I get up early and it sucks. I usually get up early and before the kids get up and train. And also somewhat unfair. My husband's was a Navy SEAL for a decade. So he's already up. So it's nice that I have a partner that is, calling me lazy if I'm not up at 4, but, just throat punch him. But anyway, so I get up early and I train early and I'm very consistent. And I'm always looking to do the next thing. So I just finished a book. So now I'm getting back into CrossFit and I'm going to be getting into jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which is something that my husband does. So very active, but the core fundamental components of the workout will be lifting, again, that cardiovascular activity, which I'm working on building up, and then a high intensity interval type session, and then some other kind of activity that's fun.
Got it. And are you doing cold and sauna? No.
I mean, I do have a sauna, which I love, but I haven't had time to do it. But
yeah, got it. I
focus on the big things. And the reality is everyone's like sleeps. Yeah, sleep's important. But I think that if you know that there's cycles of pushing, that you have to embrace that there's a battle rhythm to a human. And when I'm in a push cycle, I'm not doing the extra stuff. Like I'm not, doing an ice bath, or I'm not doing the other things. My diet is tight. My training is tight and my discipline is tight. And I'm very aware that I need to be even keeled, right? I'm not too pumped up and I'm not too low. I'm not, I'm emotionally in control. So I think that's really important because again, there's battle rhythms. And then when I have more time, I can't wait to get back into the sauna. I can't wait to do all this other stuff, but for right now, no.
And I'll give you 3 of your favorite supplements that you feel you couldn't live without.
3 of my favorite supplements. Those change, by the way. They change all the time. So I would say right now, fish oil. I'm really big into this compound called urolithin A, but I can live without all supplements, right? I should be able to live and eat. And the third one, I would say vitamin D, especially going into winter.
Yeah. What's urolithin A?
Urolithin A is really cool. So urolithin A has effect on mitophagy, which is the impact on the mitochondria, the mitochondrial renewal, mitochondria cleaning. It's like autophagy, but for mitochondria. And there's a group, and again, there's not a ton of different groups doing work on this compound, but it's a compound that is in pomegranates, in raspberries, and it is a gut microbiome precursor almost. And so 40% of the population doesn't even make it.
Yes.
But you can ingest it, and it's been shown for older individuals to help with mitochondria and strength. And it's just an interesting compound where I'm liking the data that I'm starting to see on it.
Where are you getting that from?
Cool.
What's it called? Mito Life or something?
MitoPure. Yeah. But there's multiple companies, but I love MitoPure. I think that they're one of the original people. And they've got a handful of really good scientists in there, which is cool.
I think that they're based in Switzerland.
They are.
Yeah. I met the CEO on Friday night. I just happened to have met him.
You guys just happen to be in a Mito, just like, hey dude, what do you do?
It was kind of a health people hangout, which sounds really nerdy, but we as health and wellness individuals, we're always liking each other's posts and we never see each other. And so Junaid Kolmadi, who runs Farmers Juice, got a bunch of health and wellness people together, and I met the CEO, who's a lovely person. But tell me about your book. When can we buy it? What's it about?
Yeah, well, no surprise. It is about muscle. It's really about being strong at any age.
Yeah.
And it's a book on muscle and protein, and really goes in the opposite direction of what you're hearing in the current longevity space. And it's evidence-based. And that goes on pre-sale in February. And then the book actually doesn't even come out until September. So I'm pumped about that.
Okay, excellent. Well, send me a copy. And then next, how do we follow you and keep in touch with you?
Yes. And by the way, I also have a podcast. Have you listened to my podcast? Very informative.
I want to hear about that. I listened to it in preparation for this.
Okay. Did you listen to mine, though? Not me and other people. My podcast. It's a lot of effort goes into this podcast. And actually, I interviewed one of the world-leading experts on protein restriction in the first episode. Great.
Oh, wow.
Amazing.
So was it an argument?
No. She's a great. So the real good scientists don't argue, because there's no like argument. It's, a hypothesis is a lie until it's proven to be true.
Right.
And the real experts in the field are always respectful, right? So I came from academics; they're always respectful. It's not like this shit show that you see out there. But the highly respected individuals typically don't argue with each other, and they're very interested in other perspectives and learning, very open-minded.
Yeah. It's also true that people who have the truth don't need to yell it.
Yeah. I had a great conversation with this would be a great guest for your podcast. His name is Dr. Samuel Buckner, and he is an expert in muscle physiology, muscle hypertrophy. This guy is awesome. And I was like, hey, Sam, do you go and do you do a lot of the social media? I don't see you all over. He goes, no, the truth eventually comes out. The truth eventually comes out. And there is an enormous amount of evidence in this thing that the truth ultimately comes out. So that's where I focus. And he said that's where he focuses his time. So anyway, I have my own podcast, and it's called Shocking, the Dr. Gabrielle Lyon Show. Terrible name. I just did it so people could find it.
I like it.
Comes out every Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's the worst. I wanted to call it something else, but anyway.
What did you call it? Did you want to call it Muscle Queen?
No. You know I'm only 5'1", by the way. I'm 5'1", like 110 pounds on a good day.
Oh, amazing. I had no idea.
I'm ripped, but I'm 110. I'm a very tiny person.
You have a big spirit.
I do. And a big mouth. So there you go. Yeah. So, yes. So I have a podcast, and I think it's great, and it's really all for the listener. They can find it on all places you can listen to things, and on YouTube. So I interview the guests. A lot of times they're in my studio. They can find me on Instagram, Twitter. You are not in the States. You're in Australia, New Zealand?
No, I'm in LA.
You're in LA? Are you kidding? And you're doing this remote? I am coming to LA in January. I'll see you in person. I can't believe you're in LA. Okay. Yeah. Well, so if you are interested, I do have a concierge. I have a full medical practice, by the way. I see patients 2 days a week. I have a full team. I have a physician. They're all kind of military based, amazing individuals.
Wow.
Brian Stepanenko, and I have a PA named Colleen, and health coach Alexis Belrose, and I have a registered dietitian Kylie Fignano. We have a whole team, white glove service. So
wow,
you know
so
someone,
much fun.
You're interested, you can apply, and then a newsletter and a free protocol.
Excellent. And your handles on Twitter and Instagram, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon?
Yes,
okay.
Sir. Yep.
Excellent.
And when does this come out? So when does this come out?
This will come out in 2 weeks.
Okay.
3 weeks?
I want to say one more thing. Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
So I work very closely with military operations. So if anyone has been following me for any length of time, I'm married to a SEAL. I work in multiple domains within special operations. And there is something called Folds of Honor. And it's called 7 Expedition. So it's 777 Expedition, where a good friend of mine, Mike Sorelle and Andy Stump, and they were just on Joe Rogan, are going to be jumping 7 continents in 7 days. 7 jumps, 7 continents in 7 days to raise money for Folds of Honor. So if people are interested in that, I think it's a...
Jumping what?
It's going to... Jumping out of airplanes.
Oh. I mean, you just said jumping, like as if I know what that is. I'm not a Navy SEAL.
What a terrible idea, jumping out of airplanes. Yeah, so they are doing that to raise money for military families. So military families that, to provide support and resources, education and stuff. So it's great.
Amazing. If anybody's interested, please check that out. Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, thanks so much for joining us here on the Zaddy Zone.
Yes. Thank you.